Dave Talks Comics, Episode 25. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. Talk about the comics I have read and the cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. On Twitter at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to dave@davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This is not a spoiler-free podcast. Dave Talks Comics is not a member of the Spoiler-Free Podcast Network. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics, I will almost certainly spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will only be talking about comics, no cartoons this time around. First, I'll be talking about The Nom, issues 13, 14, and 15. Second, I will be talking about Volume 2 of The Exterminators. And I will finish up with the third part of 3 of my coverage of the Generation Saga, that is Infinity Inc., issues 8, 9, and 10. The Nom, issues 13, 14, and 15. The Nom was a comic book, ran for, I think, about 60 or 70 issues, starting in 1986, I believe. And it was chronicling the soldiers of a particular unit that fought in Vietnam, starting in, I believe, 1966, and each issue was supposed to cover a month. The idea is it would take, I'm not sure how many months to cover, I guess, all the way through the final, the last soldiers leaving Vietnam, which was in 1975. I'm not sure how many, it would have been about 10 years, something, I'm not sure, maybe 120 issues. Something like that. Anyway, I had previously read, although I didn't, this was before I started doing this podcast, I previously read the first 12 issues of The Nom. They originally released them in 3 trade paperbacks. Each one was just 4 issues. This was like from probably the late 80s. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure where they're at right now, those trades. So, the penciler, the original penciler on The Nom was Michael Golden, and issue 13 is his last issue. And this story takes place in February of 1967, and the main character up to this point has been a guy named Ed Marks. And tour of duty in Nam was normally a year, 12 months, and so this is his last month in Vietnam. And so that's basically what this one's about. And so the issue basically chronicles his time, his going out on patrol for the last couple times, and hanging out with the guys, and then eventually getting on a plane. And so that's issue 13. And issue 14, you've got a new penciler. This is March of 1967. Excuse me. And it really shows. And the new penciler is Wayne Van Zant, and the inker is John Beatty. I think Michael Golden was inking himself. No, he wasn't. But it wasn't John Beatty who was the inker previous to this. And this issue is kind of about some new guys showing up, including a new platoon commander, a new lieutenant. Let's see, what else did I...
Yeah, so that's basically about it. And they're going out on patrol, and the new platoon commander probably takes more chances. Takes more chances than he should. No, he does. There's no probably about it. He definitely takes more chances than he should. And you get a little bit of background on some of the other new guys, the enlisted men who were serving in the platoon, who have just joined this platoon, which is part of the 23rd? Yes, the 23rd Infantry, I guess. 23rd Regiment, I guess. 423, which I guess means 4th Battalion, 23rd Regiment. So that's issue 13, or no, I'm sorry, 14. And then issue 15 is set in April of 67, and it's called Notes from the World. And this actually, this is a good portion of this issue is devoted to a letter from Ed Marks, the guy who left in issue 13, because even though he returned to the United States, he did not. His enlistment was not up. He still has some time to serve, and it's him telling his story about how he went back to the States and ended up becoming they called him a drill instructor. I always thought that in the Army they were drill sergeants, and in the Marine Corps they were drill instructors. I'm not sure. So I'm not an expert on the Army, but I served in the Marines, and I know they certainly were drill instructors in the Marines. But anyway, he serves as, in a training capacity. And so he tells them some stories about that, and some stories about going home and seeing his parents and seeing an old girlfriend who's now married and has a kid. And, so it's that kind of stuff. And I got to say that there's a big improvement from issues 14 to 15 in the inking, even though they're both inked by John Beatty. I don't know if he had more time or he put more time into it or what it is, but the tones, the inking is much better. It was very flat in issue 14. I mean, it's a decent story, but very flat. And it's definitely not Michael Golden. I mean, Michael Golden's work is beautiful. I mean, there's some good work here, but it's definitely not Michael Golden. So that's it for issues 13, 14, and 15 of the NAM. Exterminators Volume 2, Insurgency. On a previous episode, and I'll try to make some note of it at some point but on a previous episode I talked about Volume 1 of the Exterminators. Exterminators is a Vertigo series which is about a company. The main character is a guy named Henry James, and he is an ex-con who is now working for a exterminator business. In other words, they deal with insects and rats and stuff like that. But there's a little more to the story than just them dealing with those. There's there's definitely some supernatural elements to this, although they're kind of on the outskirts. It's not, like superhero type stuff, but definitely supernatural. And this series is written by Simon Oliver and drawn by Tony Moore. Although this particular collection, there is the insurgency storyline is broken up. There's 2 chapters to it. Then there's an interlude, and the interlude is drawn by Chris Somney, and then you get 2 more chapters. So a number of things happen in this collection. You get Henry and his girlfriend Laura things have been a little bit rocky. She's been cheating on him and trying to push him into getting a different job, and so spoilers, they end up breaking up before this issue is over. At the same time, he meets another woman named Paige who works for I'm not sure how to characterize this, a business that which is mostly run by women, or at least as far as I can tell, it's entirely run by women, which it's not a whorehouse. They aren't prostitutes, I don't think, but they're feeding men's fantasies, and so there's all sorts of weird stuff going on, and I'm not going to try to describe any. I mean, there's some that have to do with like Alice in Wonderland, and anyway, they're brought in. The exterminators are brought in. Henry and one of his co-workers, Stretch, come in to deal with an infestation of spiders, and that's kind of what a lot of the first issue revolves around, or at least as far as for them goes. And the other thing I should mention is that there's one of the pages from this. Let's see, I think it's the 6th page. 2, 4, 6, 8. No, it's the 8th page in this. I bought the original page from Tony Moore at Heroes Con a few years ago, and that's the page where Henry meets Paige for the first time. And so I finally got around to reading it, which is kind of cool. Because I hadn't read Exterminators, I just really liked the page, and after flipping through all of the art, I really wanted something by Tony Moore. After flipping through all his pages, that's what I ended up picking up. I think that was in 2011 that I bought that. I'm pretty sure it was 2011. So you get a number of things in this. I mean, like I said, you get this. There's this business that where they go to do this job. Then there's an introduction of a new coworker, because there was a coworker who was seemed to be dead at the end of the previous issue, at the end of the previous collection, but actually comes back in this collection. It's either AJ or CJ. I think it's AJ. And then there's a new coworker introduced, Kevin, who has some weird predilections that show him eating live ants, but after coating them with honey, and then one night Stretch and Henry follow him, and it turns out he's taking part in some sort of an arena where he's fighting, wearing a mask. He's fighting a whole bunch of rats, and they ended up having to pitch in to help him out. At the same time, something's developing between Henry and Paige, but Paige is also helping him to discover something about this box that he found in the first volume, which has all these mysterious keyholes on it. And so she takes him to this Professor Wolf, who looks at it, and he doesn't get any answers, but that's that. Okay, so then you get the interlude, and the interlude isn't about Henry, but it's all about Laura, his ex-girlfriend by that point, and Paige, the new woman he's met, who works at this business that's introduced in issue 6, the first chapter of this collection. And their paths cross tangentially. They actually exchange a few words, not knowing who the other one is. They're both going to visit their mothers, and so you get both of them talking to their mothers about. Well, actually, I don't think Paige talks to her mother about Henry, but Laura certainly is talking to her mother about Henry, and so that was kind of neat. How I wasn't sure exactly where it was going or what it was doing. But it was kind of neat, the parallels between the two, and very different. Their mothers are very different, and their backgrounds are very different, and then the rest of the issue. There's 2 more chapters in this, and the first one, well, they both have to do with. Okay, so there's this one bug that somehow survives that big fight at the end of the first collection. And he looks a little different, and I don't know if he's supposed to be immortal or the reincarnation of something or what it is, but he's leading all these and he's a cockroach, I believe, and he's leading all these other cockroaches. And so all these cockroaches are swarming, and they're swarming over this power station, the generators, and it's causing blackouts. And so the exterminators are called in to go in there and deal with them, and so they go down into the sewers, and they end up getting into a fight with the cockroaches. And it's tons of cockroaches, but at the same time, there's rats down there in the sewers, and so you get this whole rats versus cockroaches versus exterminators thing going on, which is kind of neat. And AJ shows up somewhere in there, And I think that's about it, you know. So there's definitely something going on. Oh, and then the other thing is you get some back history, you get some of the background, the history of the Bug Be Gone Company, which is the name of the extermination company that Henry and Stretch and Kevin work for, which is owned by Henry's father-in-law, I believe. Yes. No. I'm sorry, not his father-in-law. His mother's second husband. Yeah, his mother's second husband. So you get a little bit of history on that, and there's some weird stuff going on there, orgies, and of course insects, and so this definitely isn't the series for you if you really have a problem with insects. I'm not crazy about them myself, but I don't have a big problem with them. And as always, I think the artwork is great by Tony Moore, and I thought the issue that Chris Somney drew, the interlude issue, was great. And I mean, the action parts are, you know, kind of freaky, and with all the insects, the cockroaches and whatnot, and there's a certain amount of humor in this too, and but it's all very well done. And I mean, the bad part about this series is that I know that it got canceled before I think it had run its course. And so I know that there are 5 trades of this, and I believe that collects all of the issues that were printed, but I don't think the story is ever completely resolved. So I'm just kind of reading it to read it, and because I like the art, and because it's kind of weird, and because I bought that original page. But anyway, that's Exterminators Volume 2, Insurgency.
Infinity Inc. issues 8, 9, and 10. These are the last 3 parts of the Generation Saga, I believe it is called. Issue 8 is cover dated November of 1984, and the issue's title is Atomic Dreams, Nuclear Nightmares. This, of course, is written by Roy Thomas and drawn by Jerry Ordway and Mike Machlin. Although, hold on a second. And Tony DeZuniga. So Machlin and DeZuniga split the inking chores on this issue, and I believe on the next 2 issues as well. The quote at the beginning of issue 10 reads, "It's just the age, the atomic age," and that's from a quote from Rebel Without a Cause, which of course starred James Dean, and whose father was played by Jim Backus, who also played Mr. Howell on Gilligan's Island. So let's see, in this issue, this is continuation of the JSA. 5 or is it 6 members of the JSA have been turned ruthless by the Ultrahumanite, and he is, and so they're on an evil streak. They've turned supervillain basically temporarily. Superman, Wonder Woman, Hawkman, Green Lantern, the Atom, and Robin. So in this issue, you get some battles between JSA members, evil JSA members, good JSA members, and Infinity Inc. team members. In this issue, you get Nuclon and Wildcat versus the Atom. There's also a little bit of fallout from the previous issue's battle between Hawkman and Wonder Woman on one side, who were both evil, and their kids, Northwind, Silver Scarab, and Fury. The other thing that happens in this issue that's worth mentioning is that you get, well, there's a couple things. One is that the Nuclon is shown to have develop some new superpower where he can actually phase through things, and this plays a part later on in the 10th issue. But also what you get, more historically significant as far as I'm concerned, is the appearance of the Monitor. And you don't actually get to see the Monitor, but you see his satellite. And I guess I should explain the Monitor is a character who was at the center of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And he, at this point, he was revealed to be somebody who had been supplying weapons to supervillains, and in this case, the Ultrahumanite was one of those supervillains. So you get an appearance by the Monitor, although you don't actually see him. You see his hands, you see the chair he's sitting in, and also by Lila, his assistant. And then at the end of the issue, there's a house ad for All-Star Squadron number 39. And then you also get one of these personnel vital stats pages, the pinup of which is drawn by Mike Machlin, and the focus is Power Girl. Now, issue 10, the title is How Green Was My Victory? And the quote at the beginning is, "Men don't get smarter when they grow older, they just lose their hair." And I know a little bit about that from personal experience. And that's from The Palm Beach Story, which I guess was a movie because the quote is attributed to Claudette Colbert. So you get a brief appearance early on in this issue by the Harlequin, and it's kind of hinted that she knows something about Jade and Obsidian, that maybe she's their mother. And the Harlequin was a supervillain who appeared, I think, like in the late 1940s, who fought the Golden Age Green Lantern, Alan Scott, a number of times. And but like I said, she's there for like half a page, and I got to admit, her costume looks a little silly. You'd have to see it to understand. Maybe I'll post a picture of it. And I think this is a bit of misdirection. I don't think she turns out to be their parents. I think it's somebody else, but I'm not certain about that. Then you get another one of these fights between the good JSA members, the bad JSA members, and Infinity Inc. And in this case, it's Starman, Jade, and Obsidian, and the Green Lantern. And this battle takes place out in space, where Green Lantern is trying to take over a satellite to do something or other, use the satellite to broadcast images to somehow take over, I guess, because Green Lantern always had a focus on, back in the 40s, and even when he was reintroduced in the 70s, 80s, he worked for a radio company, and so he'd always been in broadcasting, so it makes sense to a degree. The other thing that you get in this issue is you get a Brainwave Jr. and the Star-Spangled Kid had in a previous issue been sent to Limbo by the Ultrahumanite. And in Limbo, they meet Brainwave Sr., and so there's a bit of back and forth between them about what's going on, and Brainwave Jr. confronts his father over some of these things. Let's see, what else of importance? There's really nothing, there's not a whole lot else. You get a little bit more on some of these evil JSA members who at the moment are captured, like Robin and Hawkman, although Hawkman manages to escape. And then the issue ends basically with 5 of the 6 evil JSA members showing up in at the Ultrahumanite's secret lair in Colorado, who at this point has captured Shira Sanders, Hawkgirl, although she's not in costume, and Dr. Midnight. And basically the JSA members have come back because they want to drink from the waters of the stream of ruthlessness, because it's kind of like they need their fix. The house ad at the end of this issue is for Spanner's Galaxy, which is a mini-series that I'd never heard of. I looked it up, and apparently it was basically a 6-issue mini-series, and it was never followed up on. And apparently it ended on a cliffhanger. So I don't know if I should even bother to try and find it and read it. But I'm intrigued. I think it was written by Nick Cuti, C-U-T-I, and the artwork on that series was by Tom Mandrake, who would later go on to draw Firestorm with John Ostrander, and I think he also did some other stuff with John Ostrander. Oh, right, he drew, I believe, the Spectre series with John Ostrander. I want to say something else too, at least one other thing, but I'm not certain. Okay, so issue 10 is titled A Dark and Deadly Place, and this is the last chapter in the Generation Saga, and this opens with a great splash page showing the evil JSA members about to take on the Ultrahumanite, and of course they're there for the waters of the Stream of Ruthlessness. And so this whole issue is basically a showdown between the evil JSA members, the good JSA members, and the members of Infinity Inc. And in the end, it basically all boils down to, or what the crucial element becomes a battle between Brainwave Jr., Brainwave Sr. teaming up together to take on the Ultrahumanite. And I don't want to go into too much detail about how the battle goes, but I think you can probably guess that if this is the final chapter, who wins in the end. So, all in all, I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was much better than the what's it called? The Ultra War. The story in which the Ultrahumanite during World War II in All-Star Squadron that I talked about several episodes ago. It's a much better story than that one. I think it's much better paced. It's much better put together. It's just all in all, it's a better story. It didn't feel quite as chaotic as that one, and I liked it because of that. I'm not saying it's a great story. I'm not saying it's my all-time favorite. But I enjoyed it. I'm glad I finally came back to read the whole thing, because originally I bought some of these issues, but when they first came out, but I had never read the entire story. I think I'd read only the first 4 or 6 issues. So the final issues I had not. Oh, and then the cover to issue number 10 is actually an homage to an old issue of All-Star Comics, I believe number 37. Which shows the evil members of the JSA carving up, well, with knives, kind of carving up a map of the United States. And the Ultrahumanite behind them, arms in the air, victorious, shouting, "I win." Let's see, anything else? Well, okay, this is probably as far as I'm going to go with Infinity Inc. I don't have any plans to read any further. Roy Thomas continues to write the book. It continues on for over 50 issues. But this is the last issue that Jerry Ordway and Mike Machlin team up on, and I don't think either one of them continues on this book. And part of the draw for this book really was the artwork. I like the storytelling. I like Jerry Ordway's approach to storytelling. The way he lays the pages out, the way he lays the panels out, and as well as just the way he draws these characters. And I guess another part of it that I'm dissuaded is that it seems like Roy Thomas wants to get away from the legacy stuff, get away from telling stories that pull in things from the JSA, or at least that's the impression I get from what he's written in the letters pages, and so that's another reason why I don't think I'm going to try reading any more of Infinity Inc. The only reason I can think of to read more is that there are some more heroes introduced in future issues, and it would be kind of cool to see those, because at this point, this Infinity Inc. still is set on Earth 2. This is Crisis on Infinite Earths is beginning about this period, and I don't know if it's begun just yet. I don't think it has. But so eventually there's just one Earth, and Infinity Inc. takes place on that Earth. And I don't know. Anyway, I'm not very interested in reading any further, but like I said, on the whole, I thought this was a very enjoyable story, and I think it's worth a read if you're a fan of Earth 2, of those old stories, or the old Justice Society stories. I think this is an excellent read. I'm not sure if I would recommend it to everybody, but certainly if you're a fan of superhero stories of that era, of the early to mid 80s, I think it's worth a read. Or, like I said, a fan of Earth 2. That's it for episode 25 of Dave Talks Comics. Questions or comments can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com. You can also tweet them to me at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to Dave at davetalkscomics.com. A couple other notes. Although this is my 25th episode, I don't consider this to be a milestone, although I am coming up on almost 1 year of this podcast. I believe the first episode came out June 24th, 2013. I am headed to Heroes Con next weekend, so there probably won't be an episode next week. I have plenty of stuff recorded for future episodes, but I will probably, the next episode or 2 or 3 will probably be coverage of Heroes Con. I may try to tape a panel or 2 using my phone. I've done that before. I'm not sure what the sound quality will be like. If somebody else is recording it, I will just link to them. I won't bother to put in my provide my coverage of the provide my recording of the panel. So next episode will probably be in 2 weeks, the final weekend of June.